Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going to look at the best level 2 trader weapons in patch 0.13. What makes level 2 traders more complex than level 1 is that we're also comparing to the flea market as well, which in some cases is way cheaper. So starting with Prapor, there are 3 pistols, the Shrimp, the APS and the APB. Now, I'm not super keen on 9x18, and although the APS and APB do both go full auto, the recoil here is incredibly high, which I guess is kind of fun in its own way. I suppose you could use the APB for Punisher 2 for killing scavs with suppressed weapons, or use it as a sidearm if you're using something long range like a bolty, but at 30k it's not really that cheap either. The Shrimp though, bartering for 1 blue gunpowder is actually pretty good, as these range between 9k to 14k roughly. The only round that you can buy here properly is P, which has 65 damage and 18 pen, so kind of similar to 9x19 PST, although there is a craft for BT, the best round at Workbench 2 now. Next, we should bundle the AKs together. In 545, the AK-74N, the AKS-74N, and the AK-74M are all very similar, and these versions, which have N and M in their name, have dovetail mounts for optics, unlike the standard AK-74 and AK-74 Plum, which do not and rely on a Bastion cover instead. Personally, I prefer the Bastion anyway, as sights sit at the lowest point, reducing height over bore, and you get a small bonus of -1% recoil reduction versus the dovetail mounts, which typically give you a disadvantage of -1 ergo. Once you have completed Gunsmith 2 and have the AK-100 handguard, a reasonable cheap AK build uses the DTK muzzle from Skier 2, the VPG grip from Peacekeeper 1, the AK EPG pistol grip from Peacekeeper 2, or the saw grip from Mechanic 2 if you've got him unlocked. Onto this you can add a Bastion cover from Skier 1 and a Cobra EKP from Jaeger 1 plus the sight shade on Prapor 1. This costs about 70k total, 35 for the gun and a further 35 for the mods. At 54 ergonomics and 74 recoil, it's really not that bad. Completing Gunsmith 6 as soon as possible is really a good idea, and I'm adding the whole series here on the channel if you do get stuck on any of them, as this unlocks the rubber butt pad and gives you 7 more recoil reduction for cheap on Prapor 2. If you want to spend more and push it to the maximum, go with the RS-47 handguard instead from Peacekeeper 2, which has -2% recoil on it. Same with the RK4 from Skier 2 with another 2% recoil reduction, and using the saw grip does get to 59 ergo and 62 recoil, which is getting pretty decent. This time we're talking more 90k total, 35k for the gun again, but 55k's worth of mods. Moving on to the 7.62 AKs, the AKMS has 4 more ergonomics but 7 more recoil as standard than the AKM, and it comes with a magazine that also has another 3 more ergo than the default version, hence seeming to have 7 more ergo in total than the AKM that you get from Prapor. Using the equivalent parts for the kitted build on the 545 AKs, the AKMS comes to 60 ergonomics and 89 recoil versus the AKM's 53 ergonomics and 83 recoil. The only difference here is that you need to use the TT-AK adapter on the muzzle to get the DTK from Skier to fit. 3 other choices are the PP19, which itself has a dovetail mount and is very stable to fire, but it's quite underpowered at level 2 traders due to the lackluster performance of 9x19 PST. Although it is pretty cheap to run, you're relying on headshots to get it done with this gun, and an AK-like rate of fire doesn't help in this regard either, outside of providing some recoil benefits. The SV98 is normally straight up cheaper on the flea market if you want a nice bolt action, but the Mosin Sniper is interesting for one reason: the K&W mount at Jaeger 1. You can use any scope that you want with the Mosin if you do this. First you add the Kochotov mount from Prapor 1, and then instead of the regular PU rings, put the Arbalete Patriot K&W onto it. This gives a very general Picatinny rail so that you can choose whatever you want to use from here. Moving on to Skier, we have 2 more pistols here, a variant of the Rhino in 357 and the new Glock. The Rhino is kind of cool because you can buy Magnum FMJ from Jaeger 2, which is the best cartridge in this caliber with 70 damage and 35 penetration, and only costs 150 rubles. With 6 shots though, you'd better make sure that they count, but you can even get through class 4 armor with this gun, and maybe you'd want to use it for stir up. The new Glock I haven't used yet, but is probably yet another 9x19 pistol, although it comes with a 19 round magazine as standard, which is pretty nice. At Skier 2 you can also get the 24 round mag instead for even more capacity. As for his larger weapons, I think Skier's ADAR is just too expensive to ever buy from him, and the ammo too mediocre except at the very start of a wipe. Talking about the first week only pretty much. If you want to use one, normally buying an ADAR from the Flea and combining it with a 100% durability lower from Skier 1 for 7k is cheaper. Just remember, you need to swap out the gas block or front sight combo on this weapon when using most red dots and hollows, as the front post will stick up and potentially block your view. Skier's MCX barter is normally too expensive versus the straightforward flea price, and ammo is an issue again here as well. Skier 2 has BCP FMJ, which is the equivalent of M855 for 5.56, and M62 rounds are decent despite being similar to 8.56A1, but are on Peacekeeper so only come later. With 84 starting recoil and very harsh on horizontal kick, it's hard to control the MCX without some decent modding that we don't have access to yet. This weapon can become really good, but not so much at level 2 traders in my opinion. The two SAG AKs are way too much for me for semi-auto. I'd prefer an AK-74N any day of the week. The relatively low recoil, high starting ergo, and good accuracy just aren't worth giving up the fun switch when firing 5.45 for me, but if you enjoy a short to medium range sneaky playstyle, then you can just stick a suppressor on and they will work fine. The RFB barter is actually really great. This is new and used to be 55k in cash, but that was pushed to Skier 3. So this barter actually tends to be around 30 to 40,000 rubles and is even cheaper than it used to be. The issue is M80 being moved to Peacekeeper 4, so now we're reliant on the expensive craft at Workbench 2. Stacking mags with M80 on top and TCW at the bottom is the best way to go about extending the life out of your M80, taking maybe 2 or 3 mags total and having 10 M80s in the first with 10 TCWs underneath. In the other 2 spare mags, you might even want to get away with 5 versus 15, but it's really up to you as to how many good rounds you want to keep at risk on your PMC if you die. Doing 10 and then 5 and 5 leaves only 20 out on your player with a stack in your secure container to limit the amount you lose. My favourite early build for the RFB uses the barter for the hybrid 46 suppressor because of its high ergonomics, the VFG foregrip, polymer mags from Mechanic 2 and whatever optic you like. An LCAN is nice and I do have a trick for getting one of these cheaply in a moment. I also enjoy the Prism 2.5 times from Skier for its zoom level, size of scope and budget price. This one is definitely a love-hate optic with some players using it a lot in the mid-game and others vowing never to touch it ever because of how it looks. Now the STM is an interesting gun. Incredibly light at 2 kilos, it has really high ergo and very low recoil so it feels great to shoot, but with semi-auto mode only on the 9mm it feels a bit like the SAG AKs but even worse. If you can hit your headshots, then by all means this will work beautifully, but I'll try not to say I told you so when the death screen has 9 hits and 400 damage absorbed by armor. One interesting fact though about the STM is that the GL core stock that it comes with is one of the highest ergo stocks in the game that fits the buffer tubes, but it's on Skier 3 as a standalone part. There's a good way to get it is to strip it from the scav version on the flea market and sell the rest of the gun back to traders. So, onto Peacekeeper. Most of Peacekeeper costs too much money. The 5.7 barter is not worth it for a start, and I think the USPs are usually cheaper on the market. Upwards of 20k is a bit steep for one of these, I think. Then we have the M4, the AUG, the G36C, the MPX, and the MPX suppressed, which can pretty much always be found cheaper on the flea market too. If you want to start at M4, buy the lower from Mechanic 2 for 20k, buy a cheap ADAR on the flea market and swap over the parts. This normally costs about 50k rather than upwards of 80 on Peacekeeper, and the stats are very close. At $315, I think the MP5 probably is fairly priced and is basically the same rationale as the PP19 but with a higher fire rate, slightly worse recoil profile and more difficulty in mounting an optic. The MP5 SD, on the other hand, can be bought after completing Peacekeeper's Quest Scrap Metal and would be really good if 9mm didn't suck so much. 29 vertical recoil and an integrated suppressor for only $521 is actually really good. It's one of my favourite guns in the game that I never use. That said, the UMP is by far the best weapon on Peacekeeper 2 by a mile in my opinion, especially now that the knife barters have been nerfed. Cheaper than an MP5 and better performing, the basic ammo for this weapon deals 72 damage with 25 penetration. It doesn't handle armor that well, but at level 2 traders what SMG does, but for the price it's a fantastic gun, with the rails already included on the top for optics and amazing handling. You can technically get the suppressor on Peacekeeper 2 as well, but it costs nearly 1.5 times the value of the gun itself, so I'm not sure if it's really worth it. Another barter gun is the P90 SBR. This is good so long as military cables stay down at around 30k. The top rail used to be a high level mechanic trade, but it's on Mechanic 2 now, so you can go to the flea and pop that on fairly easily on a regular P90. However, this version comes with the longer barrel, which makes it surprisingly accurate. Good ammo is hard to get now, with SP193 at Peacekeeper 4 and SS190 being craft only at the Workbench 2, although the 5.7 caliber has an intermediary round called L191 that I've never used before that might be interesting. It is on Peacekeeper 3, but as it's only $1.63 a bullet and has 33 pen with 58 damage, it might work. It's not a miracle by any means, but with the P90's 900 RPM and low recoil, there might be some potential here. The final weapon is the M1A for 10 USB adapters. This can be okay if you harvest your USBs off the fleet at the right time. As I'm making this video, you can pick them up for between 3 to 4k, which is about 30 to 40,000 total if you get them all down here, which is really good value. I still think the RFB is better at this point, as modding the M1A is not all that straightforward, but if you just want something that fires 7.62 NATO in fairly close range, then you can stick a red dot or hollow on it and be on your way. Alright, next up, Mechanic. He has a few lower receivers here that are quite useful, namely for the M4, the SCAR L, the AK-74N and the VPO-209. You can either use these to build a weapon from scratch, such as the ADAR trick that we mentioned a minute ago for a starter M4, or to repair a different previously damaged weapon that is already modded. Durability is tied to this lower part, so by swapping everything over, you can get back to 100% durability for weapons that share this same base. In terms of pistols on offer, nothing really stands out. Some of the more modded versions are pretty expensive on a standalone basis for what you get, although some can be sold back to him for pretty much the same price, like the Fisher and the Osprey Glocks. For the larger weapons, his OP SKS is actually a good barter, if you like the SKS that is, as it often costs 30k or less, which is around the same price as a normal beach SKS from Jaeger, and comes with all these mods. All that needs adding really is a mount with an optic and a muzzle device. The M4A1 SOP mod is not that great a weapon by itself, but it can be good for the parts. The whole thing sells back for 129,000 to Mechanic himself and 108 without the LCAN. These optics can go for up to about 50k on the flea market, so if you can get the pro kills for less than 80, this can be worth doing literally just to harvest the LCAN and put it on another gun. Obviously it's not always worth it, so make sure you check out the prices first. The AUG A1 is not worth doing here as it's cheaper on the flea, and the same with the M1A EBR as blue tapes are way too expensive for this to ever make sense. This mini Mosin barter, I don't really understand what the deal is. I guess it's a way to recycle long broken Mosin snipers, but yeah, just why? As for the last two, the P90 trade is really expensive, but late game it can sometimes break even due to the suppressor, and the M700 is very bad early wipe as everyone needs energy saving lamps, so these are too expensive as well. Onto Jaeger, he has another Rhino pistol similar to Skier but cheaper because it doesn't have any tactical devices. A Hunter I've stopped recommending about 3 patches ago after the RFB came into existence, and now with the gas analyzer barter the RFB is even cheaper than the Hunter, so the argument is even more compelling given it has smaller mags and less options generally. The MP153 is in my opinion one of the best shotguns in the game, with a fast semi-auto rate of fire, good handling and cheap too for what it gives you. My favourite early-ish build for this is the 8-round MP133 mag, or a 7-round 153 if you're stuck with Jaeger 2, a GK02 muzzle on the end and a target ring scope with a sprut and a laser. It's simple yet very effective. The Saiga 12 is another decent shotgun with magazines this time, so it has a small edge on reloading but only 6 shots on the initial salvo versus 9 from the 153 using the extended mag. However, this does mod like an AK, which is pretty cool, and 25k is a really cheap starting price. I don't think there's much point to the MP155 unless you're modding it out fully versus the other shotguns. That way does get you great ergonomics, but for the most part the others are more flexible and a bit cheaper, so it's not as good value. Now I want to love the Mossberg, but it's kind of expensive with low modding options. It does handle well and you can get some incredibly large magazines for it, all the way up to a 13 rounder, but even the 11 rounders are on Jaeger 3, so it's not always accessible. Finally, the M700 barter is a good way to get a 100 durability version fairly cheaply as a base starting point if you're looking for a nice sniper, given that beard oils sell on the flea market for around 35k, which is usually the trader price. So overall, what are the best weapons for level 2 traders? For assault rifles, I like the AK-74N with PP rounds from Prapor 2 for class 4 busting with decent recoil, and for SMGs it's the UMP from Peacekeeper 2 with match FMJ ammo which gives extremely good handling and low recoil. Just be mindful of the low armor penetration. Mechanic's SKS barter is probably the best value DMR using any scope and PS rounds, and for the shotguns I like Jaeger's 153. The RFB barter is an honourable mention, and with the ability to craft M80 now at Workbench 2 it could be a possibility if you're really keen on that 2-tapping class 4 thoraxes with your DMRs. Otherwise you may as well just stick with 7.62 PS at this point. So next go and check out my video on the biggest changes to armor and ammo, including the M80 craft and much more. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, hit all the buttons if you enjoyed the video, and as always, have fun in your raids.